Part 4. Recollections. Remembering my lamas. In the summer of 2008, while I was recuperating from a major heart attack, I went through the audio tape recordings of His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche's oral teachings. Many of them were quite old, some even dating back more than 2 decades. As I played them again, everything about him, his kindness, his wise words, and his wit and great ease, was like a soothing fountain that warmly flowed into my heart. Memories of those passing years flooded my mind. I had been with His Holiness for more than 2 decades. As his student, I was extremely eager to be around him. But whenever I was in his presence, I was too anxious to know what to do, and often did not even dare to raise my head. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I might have received more teachings from him had I not been so nervous. Nevertheless, I do not have any regrets, for my devotion to His Holiness has enabled me to obtain his complete blessings, which are the same as those of a real Buddha. For a Buddhist practitioner, this is more than enough. One of the recordings was a song chanted by His Holiness during his visit to Samye Monastery on December the 25th, 1988. He sang it as the familiar sights at Samye evoked the memory of his past lives. In the beautiful land of Odayana, in the center of the lotus-light palace circled by dakinis, sits Guru Rinpoche, my heart's desire, life after life. All the fortunate beings in the glorious copper-colored mountain are listening to your wonderful song of liberation. But I, who do not have such good fortune, have to wander in this part of the world alone and desolate. On the 2nd floor of Samye Monastery, you once preached the way of liberation. How fearless and mighty I, your disciple Dorje Dudjom, was back then. Wholly unlike how I am now, old, doddering, and graceless. O my Guru Rinpoche, with your great compassion you will never desert me, for without you, to whom else could I turn? Samye Monastery is no longer the same, but I still remember where you once sat inside. At the place where you smiled, only sorrow fills my memories. Of all your ministers and disciples, and the Vidyadharas as many as stars, Khandro Yeshe Tsogyal and I, Dorje Dudjom, were your most favorite. But alas, who could ever have expected that I fell so much? So I beg you not to abandon me, for I have neither abilities nor fortunes. I vowed in your presence to help beings vast as space. I shall do so without flinching, however hard it might be. Please forgive me for what I just said. I shall now put on the armor of Manjushri and spread the teachings, to benefit all beings and to fulfill your wish. May all that have a connection with you be reborn in your land, and taste the supreme nectar of your extraordinary Dharma. To help me march on, I thus pray for your blessings. His Holiness was in tears when he sang this song, and his sobs choked his singing. In the background there was also the weeping of his students. When I heard the recording, tears welled up in my eyes too. Whenever His Holiness talked about his masters and recalled his time with them, he became dewy-eyed and sentimental, and we would shed tears as well. Through his numerous incarnations, His Holiness appeared in various emanations to benefit all beings, but he seldom revealed his past lives. Only when he talked about his teachers did he occasionally touch on the subject. His Holiness had extraordinary faith in Mipam Rinpoche. Although the two did not live in the same period, they had a close connection with each other in their past incarnations. It is well recognized that Mipam Rinpoche was an emanation of Manjushri. In 1997, when His Holiness underwent medical treatment in Guilin, a city in southern China, he recalled one of his previous incarnations as Sudhana, who followed Manjushri's advice to meet more than 110 spiritual teachers. One of the places Sudhana went to was called the Fountain of Joy, and it was located exactly where His Holiness stayed in Guilin. In another incarnation of his, he visited the holy Mount Jizu with Manjushri's emanation to meet the great Indian Buddhist master Asanga, who at that time was practicing asceticism. When His Holiness reincarnated as Tenzin Yur Buma, one of King Jesa's ministers, his then father Danma was Mipam Rinpoche's previous incarnation. As King Jesa's right-hand man, Danma was also the incarnation of Saraha, one of the 84 great adepts in India. His Holiness's recollections clearly showed that behind every unstained lineage lies an extraordinary connection built over many lifetimes between a master and a student. It was His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche's root Lama, Thubga Rinpoche, that he spoke of most often. He often said that his happiest days in life were his 6 years of study under Thubga Rinpoche at Zachuka's Kyangma Ritro Monastic College between the ages of 18 and 24. After the passing of Thubga Rinpoche, he had to return to Serta, his home county, and memories and thoughts of his root Lama accompanied him for the rest of his life. And now I too have been left behind by my teachers. I can only revisit them in my memories. My first teacher was Khenpo Tsewang Jigme, who also gave me my name shortly after my birth. When I was a kid, I was known for my mischievousness. I liked to play around with other kids, often causing trouble to my mother. But one day, I suddenly wanted to make a change. Uninterested in mundane skills and knowledge, I was fascinated by Buddhism. So I went to see Khenpo Tsewang Jigme, a famous Buddhist scholar and yogi in the region, wanting to study Buddhism under him and to learn how to read and write. It was a difficult time, and Khenpo's care and guidance helped my mind to grow. More than a decade later, it was again under Khenpo's guidance that I gained some understanding of the great perfection. When I studied under Tulku Gunning at Tasha Monastery, Tulku told me that I had a close connection with him that was formed over many lifetimes, and that it was precisely this connection that urged me to go to Tasha Monastery when I was 14. I never lived with my father. Tulku adored me like his own son, and gave me the fatherly love that I had missed. He offered me shelter, taught me sutras and tantras, took me to dig up medicinal herbs in the mountains, and let me lean against him to take naps. In winter, I often sat quietly at his feet listening to his soft and melodic chanting. The kettle sizzled on the hot stove, the air was perfumed with the sweet aroma of tea, and the room was warm and cosy. Unfortunately, those days did not last long, as Tulku passed away after less than 2 years. No longer having my Lama and his protection, I left the monastery at the age of 16 and travelled around in the region to continue my Buddhist study. At that time, in the early 1980s, the religious atmosphere became less tense in Tibet. Buddhist masters were granted more latitude in giving public teachings. Whenever a famed Buddhist scholar gave a formal teaching, students would spontaneously set up tents around where the teacher lived and gather in a temporary classroom where the teaching took place. In the Darkwa region of Ganze, I followed Khenpo Kunzang and received his teachings on the words of my perfect teacher and the way of the Bodhisattva. Being the poorest among his students, I had no decent clothes and was often hungry. Still I was happy. Khenpo did not have much either, but he often shared his food with me. Knowing that I cared about nothing other than study, he also asked other students to look after me. If I did not run errands properly, he asked them not to blame me. A year later, after Khenpo Kunzang finished his teachings, I went to the Dzogchen Sri Singha Institute. During my study at Sri Singha, my health deteriorated severely due to a prolonged period of malnutrition and excessive study. If it were not for Khenpo Terno's timely treatment of me, I would have died in a foreign place. Meanwhile, Khenpo Pema Tsewang also helped me greatly. It was through his recommendation that I had the chance to meet my root teacher, His Holiness Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche. At Larung, a wanderer like me finally had a home. As a close student, I stayed at His Holiness's side for 21 years, from the age of 21 to the age of 42. His Holiness is the inspiration for all my awakened wisdom and compassion. I feel extremely privileged and deeply grateful to have been with him in the prime years of my life. As I have matured over time, the little renunciation and bodhicitta that I have generated, and every kind thought and act of mine, are all attributable to his blessings. Whenever I think of him, my heart is filled with abiding sweetness and melancholy. His Holiness's presence always exuded an air of exceptional warmth and expansiveness. One could not help but feel the utmost respect for him. He often placed his hand on my head and gently stroked it while joking with me. He knew how nervous I was, so he tried to encourage me by being gentle and intimate. Every time he stroked my head, I would be immersed in utter joy for days afterward. Actually, even just having His Holiness in my dreams could brighten my day. But now he can no longer stroke my head and tease me. Dreams are the only place where I can meet him again. Most of the teachers who taught me impermanence are now separated from me by impermanence. Although I am an ordinary man and do not remember my past lives, I will always remember the kindness of each and every teacher I have met, fortunately, in this life. My gratitude and thoughts will always be with them.